this is the final debate for the year. We have four more debaters with us today. We have Pushkar Pandey, Ishan Banerjee, Prakhar Drolia, and Devanshu. I did not catch your surname, Devanshu. If you may introduce yourself.
It's Devanshu Chaudhary.
Devanshu Chaudhary, yes. Okay. It's Devanshu's first time here. Welcome, Devanshu. So we'll be starting with the debate. The motion before the House today reads: This House believes that the government should have no influence over the operations of the press. On site proposition, we have in the speaking order as well, Prakhar Drolia and Ishan Banerjee, and on the opposition, we have Devanshu followed by Pushkar. That being said, we'll begin with the first speaker of the proposition, which is Prakhar Drolia. All speakers will get 4 minutes. Prakhar, feel free to begin.
China, North Korea, Uganda, Pakistan, and so many other countries. What do they have in common? Well, they are the countries which have a very low rank in the World Press Freedom Index, or in the index which basically shows us which country gives how much freedom to their press and which government has the most influence and the least influence on their press. These are the same countries where there is the least press freedom and most influence or control by the government on the media, which either are involved in activities which are, you could say, very damaging to the society, and are either spreading terrorism or do not have human rights in their state, etc., etc. So, in conclusion, to this point, we can say that countries which have very less press freedom or have their media influenced by the government do not have proper development in that country. Why is this so? Well, when the government influences the media, it is to present a better image of the governance, or to present a fake image to the entire international community of as to why they have even failed in proper governance of the country. We have seen governments trying to present an image of as to how they are working for the betterment of the country, and we have also seen government defending their image by presenting a fake image via the media. When the media is not influenced to spread a propaganda by the government, the media can finally give a reality check and become the real voice of the real people, rather than taking everything at face value. That is the value that the government is presenting them with. From schemes to policies to everything that the government teaches the public, the information about the government is given to the public via the press. And if the operations of the press are not influenced by the government, what happens is that the press starts taking everything for the face value as presented by the government, and rather than getting the real information. The real value can only be found out after investigative journalism. So when we come to think of this, another very important point talking why there should not be no influence by the government is
All right, Prakhar, I'm sorry to cut you off. However, your voice is a bit unclear at the moment. I think he's having some network issues, so we'll come back to him in a little while. So we'll restart his timer. He can restart his speech. So we'll just give him some time. That being said, let's move on with the next speaker, which is the first speaker of side opposition, which is, I believe, Devanshu.
No, it's me.
Right, Pushkar. My apologies. So, Pushkar, you have 4 minutes on the clock. You may begin.
Right. So, good evening, everyone. First of all, I must admit that the motion has its heart in the right place. That it aims to secure more press freedom, which is a natural extension of freedom of speech. That the media should have the freedom to report on issues which it thinks is pertinent. However, and however, we must also keep in mind that the media won't necessarily be free and independent if the government stops controlling it. Looking at the current global scenario, we find many cases of the government micromanaging media, which is irksome for those who seek unbiased news. But if the government stops influencing media, what will happen to the media? Will the media be free and independent? I make the assertion that we'll have corporates start controlling the media. In 1983, for example, 90% of US media was basically comprised 50 corporations, which are now down to 6 over the process of companies buying other companies, which has been going on for quite a bit of time. Also, in 1988, it was at 24, now it's down to 6 in Noam Chomsky's documentary, Manufacturing Consent. Now, if we have corporates start controlling the government, I don't think that it's fair to say that they want our welfare. Governments want to be nice to you, even though it might be be for gaining your vote, which of course Orwellian totalitarian governments don't need to do. But the fundamental point that the first speaker made, that we named a few countries where we have the government controlling the media and how those countries are backward. I think that a country being backward or a country having a low press freedom is a very complicated issue. It cannot be reduced to a one-dimensional assertion that is because of the government having more control. Though of course I agree that the governments in the named countries aren't very nice. Following Montesquieu's separation of powers, the legislature comprises members elected by the electorate. The executive consists of members from the ruling party. And now this is obvious, but what I want to assert is that the judiciary is also part of the government, as per the Westminster model and the model of Montesquieu. Shouldn't the judiciary have the right to make sure that what's being broadcasted follows constitutional morality? Should we have people like Suresh Travanki of Sudarshan News be allowed to spread vitriolic rhetoric and bigotry against the minorities of the nation? I don't think so. And I don't think that anyone else here would attempt to assert this. And therefore, we need the government in order to regulate them. Even in the United States, with the First Amendment, for example, freedom of speech is not absolute in the sense that the Brandenburg versus State of Ohio case used to discern whether speech is restricted to the domain of speech or whether it crosses over to the domain of action by inciting violence. One of the biggest problems facing us is that people prefer to be right in a hypothetical ideal situation rather than being effective. We don't live in a perfect world. If we lived in a perfect world, then we would live in anarchy as self-governing people. Why do we need people who rule us, who govern us, over us, like a prime minister or a president? This is because we don't live in a perfect world. Therefore, there needs to be a certain degree of control. Would you rather have that control be exerted by corporations, which is essentially an economic feudalistic system, and hierarchy where there is no democracy? Or would you rather have the control exerted by democratic bodies elected by the people who work for the people and who consist of the people? I think that while those who are speaking for the motion have the rights in the correct place, they have forgotten that there are many people in this world to exert control. Simply by replacing the government, we'll have other agencies of control, which I believe are going to be terrible for us. Thank you.
Right, with a pinpoint ending to your speech, thank you very much, Pushkar. Now, seeing as Prakhar had some internet issues in the very beginning of today's debate, we'll give him another chance to make a speech. So, Prakhar, while listening to your speech, I got cut off at about the 2-minute mark where you were talking about government policies. However, in order to make sure you can have your flow, you have the option of whether or not you want to restart your speech or carry on from where you ended.
I'll restart my screen.
All right, solid. So, you have 4 minutes on the clock. The floor is yours.
Right. So as I was saying, China, North Korea, Uganda, Pakistan, all such countries have one thing in common. What is that one thing in common? Well, all of these countries are the countries that have a very low ranking when it comes to the International Press Freedom Index, or the index which shows how much influence the government of that country has on the press in that country or how much influence they don't have. Now, these countries, China, North Korea, Uganda, Pakistan, have media which is very influenced by the government and is also in ways you could say completely controlled by the government. And what is common when we come to the actions of these governments? Well, these are the governments which deny human rights to their citizens. These are the governments which have been involved in spreading terrorism. These are the governments which are creating an unstable situation in the society. And hence, coming back to the point that it is very important for there to be no influence over the media by the government, because when there is no influence by the government on the media, it ensures proper development in that country. Now, let's take another example. Another indicator of this same fact is that the countries such as Norway, which top the HDI index or the happiness index, are the same countries that top the press freedom index. That is the countries which have the least government influence on their media. Now, moving on, why is this so? Why will we see less development in countries where the media is influenced by the government? Well, because if the government is influencing the media, they're doing so to present a better image of their governance or to present a fake image as to why they are failing to provide good governance to their people. Let's come to some examples. Now, when we have previously seen how governments in Russia, in China, in other such countries have been controlled by the government or influenced by the government to create an image that they are providing all their rights to the citizens, they are doing what is good for the society. But when we ask them tough questions, we do understand after investigation from other foreign media sources that this is not the same. And when such tough questions are asked, these are the same governments which give us excuses from their media mouthpieces. Now, what happens when the media is not influenced by the government? Well, the media can finally stop taking things for their face value and give a reality check by becoming the real voice of the real people. As till the time that the media is controlled by the government or is even influenced by the government, we will see the media taking things for the face value. That is, taking things as presented by the government straight without any research or proper investigative journalism that deprives the public from understanding the actual meaning and the actual effects of the several policies of the several statements that have been made by the people in the government and of the several different actions that the government takes. And that is why the influence of the government needs to be stopped from over the media and there should not be no influence as it can help stop propaganda. What happens when we come next? I'll also this point also rebuts what the opposition has already said and might say next as well. What the free media, what the free press is like, it is like a free market system in many ways. It controls itself, it balances itself. It is not controlled by the. It is not presenting to you like you could say one side of every news. It is keeping itself in check. There's one media house, if it is saying something and the other media does not agree, that also gives the public both the opinions and it helps the public understand the whole story, the whole uh, broad aspect of the news story. So, what this helps in conclusion is that if there is no influence by the government, it aids the development of the country, it helps present the right image, and what it can help is for us to finally become an actual progressive society.
Right. Thank you for ending on time, Prakhar. That being said, Devanshu, will come to questions at the very ending. We'll take three questions from each side at the very end. So we'll just take the speeches for now. Now we'll move on to the second speaker of side proposition. We'll go to Ishan Banerjee. Ishan, welcome back, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Am I audible?
If you could be a little louder, that would be great.
Okay. Am I audible now?
That's much better. Thank you.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Very good evening to everyone present here. Something has stuck to my head for a long period of time. It is a dialogue by Sir Appleby Humphrey from the TV show Yes Minister, where he said that we should always tell the press freely and frankly anything that they shall easily find out. When the common conception of the press is a sellout, the separation between the press and the government is even more important and is of even more urgency right now. Now, we need to look at what primarily the functions of the press are. To understand what the functions of the press are, we need to see that they do primarily two things. Number one, they inform people, and number two, they persuade people through a logical set of, a logical mindset or a reasoned mindset. Now, the moment there is governmental influence on that particular information or that particular act of persuasion, it becomes a very superficial operation. The moment there is any amount of influence on the very operation of the press, which is to inform people or to persuade people, it becomes very superficial and very one-sided. The actual or the real function or the real operation of the press is actually, the essence of the press is taken away when there is such an influence, and it is a very strong influence that persists. Something I take away from Pushkar's speech and something I would like to refute is the fact that he said that to what extent does the morality judgment extend to? I agree there are laws. I agree there will be laws. I agree that there is misuse of freedom of speech. People misuse the freedom of speech for the minorities, for different groups of people. But one question I would like to put forward to the House today: that to what extent is the morality judgment valid? I'm not taking a philosophical stand saying that what is right for me might be wrong for you, what is wrong for you might be right for me. But what I'm saying is the laws are meant to be broken, because there at any point of time in the history of human civilization, there has been no law which has been perfect or which has not been broken. Because the moment you have law, it has subjective interpretation. Let's look at the UAPA. The UAPA can take various interpretations of what can be terrorist literature or terrorist activities and what cannot be. It has been interpreted in various ways. And the moment there is governmental influence, what the press does, you see what happens. Moving on to a more important view which should be taken today is the difference between a totalitarian system and a democratic system. In totalitarian systems, the basic thing that exists is a structural constraint. And that is something which dominates the political or the potential agency of the media, not political, the potential agency of the media. Sometimes these state-owned agencies or news agencies, broadcast medias, etc., they they are a tool of propaganda, and they become arms of the state for propaganda. And it is not just that these state-owned or state-owned media houses or the houses which have governmental influence, they don't just have direct control of the government. There are many more methods of indirect governmental control that we see in today's world. The basic thing that we see, for example, if we look at democratic societies fostering freedom of speech, if we contrast it to totalitarian societies, something which the opposition would love to argue on, even in democratic societies, if freedom of speech if it was something which was very important, and if governmental control was such an important thing for the press, Donald Trump would not have gone on and said that that was fake news which was being propagated. The New York Times and other mainstream or other mainstream news channels were propagating fake news, or they were providing different or anti-national news. Okay, I'm wrapping up, Suryan. Just give me 10 to 15 seconds. So what we need to understand today, that there is an absolute need for no influence of the government, because the moment direct governmental control fails in today's era, there is always indirect control which takes place, an evidence of which is the antitrust laws which the government uses as an indirect control. I would like to answer the questions as in the later part of my speech, but thank you for hearing me out.
All right, thank you very much for your speech, Ishan. But before we move on to the next one, just so I have a bit of clarity on the speech, so as to make sure my marking is on point, clarify something for me, Ishan. Just take a minute and answer this. What do you define as a law, and what do you see as its purpose?
What I define as the law is something which organizes human civilization, which lays down with something which directs human conduct in a systematic manner, and its purpose. Well, of course, the purpose of the law in the contemporary era is to organize humans and to ensure proper conduct. The only thing that I meant from laws and its purpose in my speech was the fact that there has been no law which has not been misused, or which has not been misused. That there has been no law that has not been subject to subjective interpretation. Because if there is a law, that is of course subject to subjective interpretation.
Right.
That is something which has existed throughout human civilization, and we can see it at all points of time.
Fair enough. I got my answer. Thank you very much, Ishan. That being said, let's move on with the next speech, which is Devanshu Chaudhary. I remember your name now. Who is the last speaker of today's debate, and the last speaker of the opposition. Devanshu, you have the floor.
Yeah, am I audible?
Yes, you are. Go ahead.
So a very good evening to one and all present here. This is Devanshu Chaudhary, and I'm here to oppose the motion. This House believes that government should have no influence over the operations of the press. Gentlemen, being the last speaker of the day, I must admit that I'm quite impressed by the arguments presented by almost all the speakers, especially the proposition. The proposition has beautifully and in the most dignified manner simply refused or overlooked the major implications of today's agenda in today's society. I would have sympathized with each and every point presented by the proposition today if and only if the phrase "no influence" would have not been presented in today's motion. Gentlemen, it's quite imperative for us to understand here that this particular motion and I mean, this particular house does not allow any scope of interference from the government in the operations of the press. Now, let me rely on simple logic and facts, unlike the proposition, to prove to you as to why in any form of government, a certain level of influence is required over the press. I'll give you a simple example. Almost all of us are aware about the Taj attacks in Mumbai. Now, an interesting fact about these attacks, about this particular attack, or let's say any particular terrorist attack, is that while the troops were on their way towards the rescue operation, and when the entire planning was being taken place, the terrorists could easily, in the most simplest manner, get access to the entire process by simply using the televisions of the lavish hotel. Point number 2, ladies and gentlemen, I hope that the proposition shall not deny the fact that India is a diverse country with a great history of communal violence. According to certain reports by Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, about 100 people die every year of communal violence in the country. Now, if we shall allow media coverage during a communal unrest in a particular region, what shall be the potential outcomes? Let me tell you. Sentiments towards people's respective communities shall rise, and just a spark in a tiny card of such a large country could even ignite a full-fledged flame in the entire country. This even leading to a loss in trust amongst the various communities. However, the members of the proposition, for the members of the proposition, the priorities are undoubtedly different. Ladies and gentlemen, the only point that the opposition today is trying to make is that a certain amount of regulation or a check is required over any kind of press. I shall reiterate that there is no denial in the fact that the freedom of press is necessary, not at the cost of national interest. Even in the freedom of press in India, it's subject to certain restrictions such as defamation law, a lack of protection for whistleblowers, such as who provide intricate details, and even barriers to some certain sensitive information, which has been mentioned even in the Article 19 of our very Constitution. With that, I rest my case. Thank you.
Okay, with 40 seconds left in your speech, thank you very much, Devansh. That being said, we have come to the end of today's debate. Devanshu, my apologies.
It's Devanshu. It's Devanshu.
My sincerest apologies.
That is the worst struggle I have seen.
Well, I try. There's so many different names I have to memorize, huh? So let's move on to the question answer rounds now that we've wrapped up with the speeches. So we'll start with the opposition this time. Are there any questions that the opposition has to the proposition? You have a limit of 3 questions. Okay, we'll take Devanshu's question first.
Thank you. I have a question to Prakhar. In his speech, he had mentioned several times China, about their respective ranking in the world press, some statistics he had mentioned. I just have a simple question to him. Does he believe, or can he at least mention any independent form of press that is present in China other than Xinhua? Because even we know the primary news channel, which is Xinhua in China, is state controlled. So can he mention any particular independent press which is directly under which is being influenced rather by the government?
Okay, now coming on to that point, as I mentioned in my speech, if you would have heard it come properly, I had not only mentioned China, I had mentioned 3 other nations, and now China is a nation which I mentioned with regards, okay, listen to this completely first, with regards to how if the media is either influenced or controlled, influence often has been seen to turn into proper control of media. The effects of influence on media and control of media are same in many prospects, as seen in cases in other countries who have had similar outcomes due to just having influence on media in their nations as compared to the completely controlled media in China as well.
Right.
Follow up is allowed?
You can I have to be fair to the others, so if we'll take that as a second question.
Okay, okay. So just now you had mentioned, the same question. I'll take it as a follow-up only. It's simple that you have mentioned that there's no difference between influence and regulation. Do you mean that when a particular government is influencing a particular organization is the same as the government is controlling the particular institution. That is not an independent institution in that case. It is being controlled by the government. It is not being influenced.
Right.
Please comment on
Prakhar?
Okay. I just like to get this question straight. If just to clarify, you have asked me that you have actually basically asked me to my view on the difference between influence and government control on media, right? Right. Okay. So as I said in my reply to your previous question, influence on the media by a government can have similar implications and has been seen to have same implications as controlled media, because what happens when a media is influenced that it starts taking things for face value. There is no regulation by the government, but the influence creates this barrier for the media to act properly. It creates an invisible regulation in that media house, in that media.
Thank you.
Right. I hope that answers your question. We'll take Pushkar's question next.
Right. Okay. While talking about a free market of ideas, no economist, first of all, worth their salt supports an anarcho-capitalist or a quasi-libertarian economic system without any control at all. Adam Smith's invisible hand is misquoted. What Adam Smith meant is that British investors will prefer to invest in England rather than abroad because of a love for the nation. This has been disproved. How then can anyone say that the free market in economics, which by the way has been repudiated by almost every economist worth his salt, would actually in turn work in the domain of ideas when we also have corporates exerting their control? I think your point does not stand then.
I can answer that.
Sure, Prakhar, go ahead.
So, as I said, I did not say that. Okay, first of all, I like to clarify this for even everyone over here that I did not say that there should be a free economic market system, or it is the same as or free press is exactly the same as how free. I said that in several ways it is similar. As you would have learned if you have gone through the free market economic system, as you had learned in basic, is that the free market economic system it has a system to balance itself. That is what the invisible hand is. That is what I said. That is what I was connecting. As I said, the press, when not under influence by the government, can still give the right information and can still support the government in areas where the government is right, because of the fact that the government because the media is supposed to keep the government in check. So what I actually meant over there, if there was a miscommunication, is that when there is free press, it does not mean that the press can just continue and go on spreading rumors, because there are other media houses which keep some media houses in check, and there are systems such as the judiciary, which is different from the government, which can keep the media in check. And hence, that is what I took. I never said that it is the same. I never said anything like that. Probably there was a miscommunication. Thank you for pointing.
Right. Thank you for responding, Prakhar.
Right. Excuse me?
Yeah.
Right. My other teammate was allowed to follow.
Yeah. So, I'll allow it. All right, go ahead.
Right. Well, first of all, keeping aside the fact that you misquoted what the free hand means. In my speech, I only talked about how the number of media houses has reduced from 50, the corporations controlling media. In US, for example, have reduced from 1583 to 6 right now. Why then should I not make the assertion that in the future, we won't have a free market of ideas? You don't have a free market of ideas if you have a monopoly. Just like you don't have a free market economic system if you have a few companies which control all the capital. A free market will only work if you have something which is preventing a monopoly. The monopoly in this case is the corporations. Job of the government being a democracy is to make sure that money does not form monopoly, and that monopolies do not influence us and manufacture consent.
Right. Prakhar?
Yeah, could I be asked the question in condensed form?
Right. Cutting out the explanation behind your question, Pushkar, could you ask the question part of the question?
Okay, so basically, we talked about a free market of ideas. How can, in absence of government control, how can we have a free market of ideas in absence of government control? When we have seen the number of corporations control the media reduce and a gradual monopoly being formed.
Okay, so just to clarify this, you have said that how can there be a free market of ideas basically when there is without government control, when there is also corporate control and monopoly, right?
No, I'm saying that there's a gradual, not without government control per se. I never said that. Inadequate government control, but that's beside the point. Basic point is that there's a gradual forming of monopoly over when the people are responsible for dispensation of news and ideas. How then can you actually have a free market when the current government control is not doing enough? Why should there be no government influence at all?
Okay. Now, if I don't stand for government influence on news, I do not stand for any kind of influence on news, and that is the clear stand. What the work of the press in its basic fundamentals, what the work of the press is to present the true facts and analyze them impartially to the public. And if the press does that work without influence from any side, from the government, from the corporate, from anyone, then the media is doing its actual job, and that is what the media should be doing, and that can only be done when even there is no government influence. So staying on the topic, there should not be government influence. And as the last line, I stand for no influence on the facts presented by the.
Right, fair enough. Thank you for responding. I hope that did answer your question, Pushkar. Now we'll move on to the other side. To the proposition. Do you guys have any questions for side opposition? Okay, Ishan, why don't you go ahead first? Ishan, we cannot hear you. Ishan, I think your audio isn't working. Could you check your input? Right, Prakar, in the meantime, do you have a question?
No, I don't have.
Right. Do you need? Right, Ishan, could you repeat?
Am I audible?
Yes, that's much better. Go ahead.
Okay, Prakhar, do you have any questions? Or should I go ahead?
Um, I could you repeat what you said?
Prakhar, do you have a question or should I go ahead?
He doesn't. He doesn't. You can go ahead.
Okay. I have a question for wait. I have a question for Pushkar. I'm sorry. Okay. Pushkar, being a member of the opposition, tell me, give me one example. I'm sorry, I just got a message from Suri. So being a member of the opposition, give me one example of just some governmental influence or just some influence of the government or the press which has not lingered on or which has not converted to an oppressive, quasi-oppressive
Understood.
regime.
Understood.
Yeah. Give me one. I just need an example.
Oh, sure. Well, first of all, the government also includes the judiciary by simple definition. We have seen the recent case of Sudarshan TV of that crazy madman called Suresh Chavanki was spouting absolute nonsense about UPSC, jihad and other stuff. And the judiciary basically told him that what he was doing is immoral, unconstitutional, and he must not do it. Is that not? I'll leave it to the House. I think that's a fair case of the government, which, by the way, is not just a few people in the top branches of top brass of the executive or the legislature. It also includes the judiciary. I think that's a perfectly legitimate in a case of the government exerting influence. I think that sufficiently answers the question.
Right.
Right. Can I have a follow-up?
Sure. Go ahead.
Now tell me, Pushkar. So my question to you was an influence, an example where the influence has not lingered on, or has not yet. Now tell me, in your very example, in the case of Sudarshan TV, what will prevent the government in the future from not exerting any influence on Sudarshan TV, be it good news, be it bad news? Where lies the interpretation of the judgment, or where lies the interpretation of the law, or whatever, X, Y, Z, to not again influence Sudarshan TV for XYZ?
And first of all, if Sudarshan TV, or for that matter, any media portal happens to spout the kind of vitriol, it must be controlled. I think we agree. And the question of whether Sudarshan TV can be influenced in the future, if it continues to make such statements, and Sudarshan TV actually has a track record of doing so, I think we can perfectly interpret what statements mean when they are so blatant and so brazenly, let's say, targeting a particular community. I think that a perfectly legitimate that we can perfectly well interpret such statements, and that these and ascertain whether these statements are immoral. And I think that in that case, and if we and the subsequent cases it doesn't tone down, I think that we can perfectly ensure that the government has a legitimate case for influencing even then.
Right. Prakhar, do you have another question or should I take the last question? Prakhar is gone.
Right. Prakhar told me that he does not have a single question, so
Okay. Right.
you can take the lead.
I have a question for Devanshu.
Yeah, go right ahead, and that'll be the last one for today.
Devanshu, now tell me. I'm sorry. Devanshu, tell me. A media house or the basic function of the press is to inform and to persuade. We know it is a lived experience that even the government's job today or government's role today has changed to persuasion only. It has not been to execute functions. It is persuasion. So when a certain amount of information is being disseminated to the public by the print, by the press, now there can be two types of influence. One where the government influences the press to propagate whatever their views, good things about them, etc., or they just stop it from being published, right? Now tell me what stop like how do you now still propagate the fact or believe in the fact that this particular form of news is not superficial, is not actually not fake of sorts? I mean, do you still feel that the public is receiving or will receive the right amount and the correct amount of news? Is that the morality of the government and the press? Or do you feel that?
Right. Did you get the question, Devanshu?
Yeah, I got it. I mean, I guess what Ishan, you have asked me is basically how can we ensure that the right amount of information is being reached out to the masses, basically. I just have a simple answer to this. I mean, even according to our constitution, hate speech is countered. Hate speech is basically not allowed in any form of case. The fact that still various media houses are presenting a different opinion to, or rather, an opposing view to the points which are being mentioned by the government itself, there is a sense of rebuttal. There are being points raised against the government. Is the very fact that both the sides are being presented in front of the masses. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it
Right.
does. Thank you.
Hope it does. Thank you very much, Devanshu. And with that, we have come to an end to today's debate. But of course, we have the results left. So I'm quickly going to pause the recording and we're going to come back after I've tabulated everything. Right. Just give me a second. We will be back.
Finish it. You also
Right.
have to pee.
So the results have been tabulated, and trust me when I say this, I try to say a lot of this to inflate the value of the debate once in a while, but now that I've come to the end of this was actually a bit too close for me to call. I've had and if I was to be giving awards, I'd be giving everyone awards, but we can't be having that now, can we? So the conclusion I've come to is that we have one best speaker and one runner up, and the runner-up is Prakhar Drolia, and the winner is Pushkar Pandey. Now, congratulations to the lot of you. However, I must explain why my result was as it is because there were so many areas that I had to consider. I tried to consider some extraneous areas. I tried even asking Ishan a certain question to make sure what was what. Now, in one scenario where someone was very structured, he wasn't as well researched, but somewhere where someone was very well researched, he wasn't as structured, and the points and if one I will be sending all of you the mark sheet privately, just remind me. If one person lacked here, the other person lacked there, and that's how topsy turvy it was. So that being said, I felt all of you did really well. Pushkar, I found your research, the way you spoke to be fantastic. I'll go from the order it is on my Zoom list. So Devanshu, I found that your speaking style was impeccable. I felt that the concepts, the ideas that you brought into the debate were also great. However, you could have been a bit more, like, you could have evidenced your points a little bit more, because while your principles seem to be very, your understanding of the motion seemed to be very on point, your explanations were missing. Something I often say on the debate is use the peel format, which is point, explain, evidence, link, which is essentially, of course, make your point, elaborate on why your point is your point. Evidence is, of course, the quote or the piece of information to support, and then say why that evidence links back to the same thing that you mentioned. So if you move forward, it's a very good way to structure it. Your structure was good, but add that evidence into it, and I think you would have had a tie in there, because the difference that I had was a point 0.5 separating you from Prakhar on structure, right? Prakhar, I found that you were also pretty well researched. Your rhetoric was pretty good. Your style of speaking was pretty good. However, if it wasn't for Devanshu's little falter over there, I think he would have tied with you, if not gotten ahead. So while I don't want to take away your shine, I wanted to give you this piece of feedback, so to make sure it'll be a little better in the next time, because improvement is key in this situation, because these aren't the most formal of debates. I tried to, because what I want to do here is I want to try to give you guys as much area for you guys to discuss, get the principles out there, and not make it a very streamlined narrow debate where you don't have much freedom to say what you want to say because of time restrictions and this restriction and that restriction. And coming lastly to Ishan, again, I've told you this before. Your speaking style is some was on another level as compared to many that I've seen. I really liked it. And again, similar to Devanshu, your principles were again very. I noticed that you understood the motion very well. It was completely sound, and of course, you're very experienced and you know how it works. However, at least for this debate, I felt that the evidence, the lacked. So wherein Pushkar got ahead of everyone, the Pushkar and Prakhar pulled away when it came to that particular point, because like even from the very onset of Prakhar's speech, he just instantly starting out by mentioning his evidence, and Pushkar made explained and refuted different principles that others brought out and tried to contest the ideas, so on and so forth. So I hope that it helps someone giving clarity into it, because I felt that all of you guys understood the motion. However, it just lacks in one or two areas here and there. And Pushkar, I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you, I found your speech to be excellent. However, your whenever you're speaking, I'll try to explain this in a way it'll be easy to understand. Um, your the rhetoric you're using, the figures of speech you're using, they're impeccable and they're very aptly used. However, I feel that your tone of voice when you're trying to speak, try to mix it up a little bit. Sometimes try to put it up on a bit more aggressive, put a bit more emotion into it. I don't want you to make it a dance drama. However, you can try, like just mixing it up a bit. Keep the audience interested, because debating is just not putting your view out there. It's a bit of an art, because I'm fairly sure you're quite experienced. Ishan's told me a lot about you, so I'm fairly sure you can mix that in somewhere, and it should be a little better from there on out. So I hope that helped. Is there anything anyone else would like to say? We have some spectators here as well. If there's anything you guys would like to add on, feel free to do so. This is your time, and then we'll wrap up.
Hi, Suri.
Hi,
I
Ayush.
have a lot to say, so I take your permission first.
Right. Ayush, if you want to turn on your camera, feel free to do so as well. And if you want to say anything.
Do I have... Okay, fine. Just for you, Suri. Right. So I have a lot to say actually. First, I'll go like one by one, right? So, who was the first? Pushkar, right? So I was very impressed in general with whatever Pushkar had to say. But Suryan gave you a lot of validation. Let me just do my part and take that away from you for a while. Um, so I think one of your arguments was one of them was kind of weak when you said that when you give the government this much power, it doesn't necessarily mean that they'll abuse it, right? I think that um, gets directly countered by something I think Prakhar mentioned. And another point was that press freedom suppression or anything is not really one-dimensional. Now that also gets directly countered by the China, North Korea, Uganda, whatever examples, right? So that's one thing where I think that one point was sort of nullified for me, which is why when I was, like thinking about it in my head, you didn't really that point didn't really shine for me. But I'll tell you what was good about your speeches and stuff, right? But I liked your I liked how you were defining the government, not really defining a government, but how you were giving value to a government by saying it's a democratic body, right? And I loved your point. Or I think you could have actually elaborated on profit maximization versus welfare maximization. We were talking about like private media and etc, right? So next speaker was Prakhar. I'm just going to go speech wise and then I'll go to the questions. So Prakhar, so sorry if I'm being very like uh, critiquing here, just don't take it personally, right? So you mentioned China, North Korea, and blah blah, etc. Right? And I've already said how it directly countered some of the other people's arguments, which is actually very impressive. But remember that whenever you bring up these countries, that everyone does it, right? But these countries aren't really ideals. Like they aren't standards you should be comparing other countries to. Because honestly, like North Korea and China, I mean, so and yeah, Prakhar, I think the sole reason why you were so great was because you're naturally a very assertive speaker, a very confident speaker, which is how I also like to sort of do things, right? And I actually love that about your style. Like it's very assertive. It's and and but I would say that you should kind of like link your points a bit better. Like your reasoning was very convincing because of your examples, like how Suryansh has already said that for me, right? But there were a few points where you say that free press is going to allow development, but that sort of gets countered very easily. I mean, I won't go into the depth, but and one good example was you were talking about Russia, I think. That was Prakhar, right? Yeah. And so a funny example you can bring up when talking about that is how Russia, the government of Russia released shirtless Putin pics to make him look stronger and stuff. So that's actually very funny. Like I would have definitely brought that up because that's just naturally funny to me. And so to every speaker in the proposition, when you're saying that the government should not control the media, there are definitely some problems that comes with free media, right? So provide actual alternatives. You could literally just say that the government, rather than controlling the operations of the media, the government should pressurize, or the people should pressurize the media to an extent, right? And so okay, for Ishan, I think my internet just died there, so I couldn't hear a lot of your speech, and also I was working on my psychology assignment, so I wasn't really listening very well. But Ishan, I've seen Ishan honestly do a lot better in other debates, but I loved a few of your points about separation between press, government, etc. So and you were one of the few people who was talking about like the institutions of the state. I think if I was unless I was listening wrong or something, but you like your point about laws and stuff was kind of contradictory when you defined law, like when Suryansh asked you to define it, right? And you like law is not a law is meant to be broken, which kind of is like you be very careful with everything you say. I mean, it makes you sound like a radical anarchist or something when you say that, right? So try and keep like try and think about what you're saying. And Devanshu was next, right? Okay, so Devanshu stood out to me particularly because of your first point, which was the Taj Hotel point, right? That is something that was in my head, and I was honestly like internally clapping when I heard that because that's a really good point. And I've also heard it like a few days ago from my friends and stuff, right? So I was really surprised to see it being brought up in a debate, but it was a very good point. But your other points where you started off strong, but then you kept sort of like your points kept getting weaker. I think it was because of the natural structure that your speech lacked. But there was one point where you said that the government should control the media. I think, yeah. So the media should be free, but not at the cost of national interest or something like that, which was a very weak point. Like again, North Korea and China and Russia, those are very good examples that counter it directly, like national interest, right? So and so that's all four speakers, right? Okay. So in general, I think everyone could have broadened the scope of debate. I guess I think you guys were focusing on freedom of speech way too much. And if you focus on freedom of speech, bring up censorship and bring up the definition of censorship. Okay, so when you say that, like, okay, censorship can be like, flagging content that can be hateful, harmful, objectionable, and stuff like that, right? But you also, I think what okay, so yeah, what you could say is that there are some things that are unanimously hateful, right? Like um, racism, etc. It's so when you talk about freedom of speech and censorship, then bring up these things, right? Like like it sort of gets cluttered when you talk about freedom of speech and then you don't go into depth. Uh, Again, okay, right. I want to talk about I think Pushkar, right? Pushkar, for me, the reason you won was your responses. Like for me, honestly, the way you answer your questions is so impressive. Like honestly, what you try and do is like, um, okay, your responses were very destructive, but also in a sense you teach the opponent that their knowledge of a certain aspect is it's so lacking, and it's very it makes you seem as if you're the smartest person in the room, and I honestly have a lot of respect for you for that, right? But one thing is that all of the economics that you brought up in your responses, you should have done that in your speech. That would have given you like a huge advantage, honestly. I'm sorry if I'm dragging this long for too long, but I have so much to say.
Yeah.
And
Go ahead.
sorry. And right. So Ishan, also I had a lot of respect for your responses and your questions. They were very first question was very to the point. I honestly was impressed with that. I think it was about countries. When you ask questions like that challenge the general knowledge of an individual or a debater, it sort of gets tough, right? Because you can't. It's I think you asked about particular media agency or agencies, and it's very tough to answer that unless you know what you're saying exactly, like. And as Ishan's knowledge of the motion was also very good. I think that was displayed in the responses itself, because I couldn't listen to the speech properly. So all in all, you guys were actually really good, and in my head I had some like differences with Suryansh's rankings and stuff, but that doesn't matter. You guys are all amazing. Sorry if I blabbered on for too long. So thanks, Suri. Thanks for the spotlight.
Not a problem, Ayush. Thank you for coming in. And that's about it to wrap up today's debate. And actually, the last one of the year, the last video that was really posting this year. So thank you for anyone watching for joining in for this last year. I really enjoyed. Thank you all for joining in, and it was a pleasure having you all. Hope to see you.
One last thing before you stop the recording. Because people will be looking at this video on YouTube, blah blah blah. It was an amazing initiative that you took at the very beginning of 2020. This being the last debate, I think all of us should give Suryansh a big round of applause for what he's been doing. So that's something amazing, and I hope this continues. So that's what that was.
Thank you very much, Ishan. And now that you've taken my line, let's put this to an end at a very apt ending. So thank you all for joining in. I hope to see you guys next time. I have a habit of saying it as well at the very ending. So yeah, that's what that was.